Once upon a time, there was a king who ruled over a vast kingdom. The king had a daughter named Princess Gulfashan. She was famous far and wide for her beauty, kindness, and wisdom. Many princes from various lands wished to marry her, but the king would reject all marriage proposals that came his way. Since Princess Gulfashan was his only daughter, whom he loved dearly, the king could not bear the thought of her marrying someone from a distant land and leaving him behind. The king had already decided in his heart that he would marry his daughter to a noble young man from his own kingdom and build a palace next to his own so that they could stay close. To fulfill this, he had already begun the construction of a palace by hiring the finest architects. The king loved his queen as well. Though he was a wise and capable ruler, his stubbornness about not marrying his daughter off to a prince from a faraway land troubled everyone. The queen would often try to make him understand, saying, "Girls are meant to go to their own home someday." But the king would not listen. The king had a wise and loyal minister. The minister had a son named Shahryar, who was skilled in sword fighting, archery, and jousting. His appearance was so handsome that anyone who saw him couldn't help but admire him. Shahryar and Princess Gulfashan had grown up together, and the king and queen loved him like their own son. This is why his education and training had always been alongside the princess. The two were very close and shared in each other's joys and sorrows. One summer afternoon, after lunch, everyone in the palace had gone to their rooms to rest. Not much time had passed when a maid came running to the queen, her voice filled with panic. "Your Majesty, please come quickly. The princess has fallen ill." The queen, alarmed by the news, rushed to the princess's chamber. There, she found Princess Gulfashan lying in bed with her eyes closed, as if she were deeply asleep. The queen looked angrily at the maid and said, "The princess is just sleeping, and you're saying she's sick." The maid, trembling with fear, replied, "Your Majesty, the princess was fine, talking with me just moments ago, when suddenly she screamed and collapsed onto her bed. I tried calling her many times, but she didn't respond." Hearing this, the queen became concerned. She tried to wake the princess herself, but when that didn't work, she informed the king. The news of the princess's condition alarmed the king. He hurried to the room and called for all the royal physicians. They began examining the princess, and nearby stood Shahryar, looking deeply worried. When the physicians finished their examination, they looked disappointed. They informed the king that the princess's condition was beyond their understanding. The king's face turned pale, and he sat down, holding his head in despair. This news spread like wildfire throughout the kingdom. The king summoned other healers and doctors from far and wide, but none could understand what was wrong with the princess, and she continued to lie in bed, unresponsive. By evening, the situation remained dire. The next day, in desperation, the king made an announcement. "Whoever can awaken the princess from her slumber will be granted her hand in marriage." Upon hearing this, no one came forward. Everyone thought, if the best doctors and healers couldn't help, what can we do? The king and queen were deeply troubled, their hope fading, when suddenly a maid came to inform them. "Prince Amr of the land of Fars has arrived, and he wishes to meet with the king regarding the princess's illness." The king, still clinging to hope, immediately summoned Prince Amr. The royal guards brought him to the king. The king had met him before, just a few days ago, when he had visited the palace with his parents. Prince Amr bowed respectfully before the king and said, "Your Majesty, I was out hunting with my companions when I heard the royal proclamation about the princess's condition. I believe I have the cure for her, which is why I have come to you." The prince's respectful tone and noble bearing impressed the king. He thought to himself, "If this handsome prince can truly cure my daughter, I will surely marry her to him." Still, the king asked one more question to be sure. "You are a prince. What do you know of healing?" Prince Ama humbly replied, "Your Majesty, the princess is not suffering from an illness. The problem is something else." The king's eyes widened with surprise. "Do you mean this is the work of some sorcery or demon?" Prince Ama shook his head. "No, Your Majesty. I cannot say that either." He then took out a small, intricately designed jeweled box and showed it to the king. "Whatever the princess's ailment may be, the cure is inside this box." The king looked at the box with astonishment and curiosity. Something about Prince Ama's words filled the queen with hope as well, and even Shahryar, who had been standing nearby, listened intently, a faint smile on his lips. After that, the king, queen, Prince Ama, and the others went to the room where Princess Gulfashan lay sleeping. Prince Ama examined her closely, then opened the small box and took out a delicate, brightly colored feather. It shimmered with radiant hues. He gently touched the princess's feet with the feather. As soon as it made contact, the princess sneezed lightly and sat up in bed, looking around in confusion. The king and queen let out cries of joy. The king quickly embraced his daughter. The princess, still bewildered, asked, "Father, what happened to me?" "Nothing, my dear. You are perfectly fine now," the king replied. He then took Prince Ama's hand and said, "Prince, we will never forget this favor you have done for us." The news of the princess's recovery spread throughout the kingdom in no time. In celebration, the king opened the royal treasury to the poor. A few days later, as promised, a grand wedding was held between Prince Ama and Princess Gulfashan. At the time of her departure, the princess embraced her father and began to cry. The king lovingly patted her head and said, "My daughter, I was wrong. Every girl must eventually go to her own home. We are fortunate that your marriage is to such a handsome and intelligent prince like Ama." Though the queen was saddened by the separation, she was also happy that the king had let go of his stubbornness regarding the princess's marriage. She too embraced her daughter and blessed her. Before leaving for her new home, Princess Gulfashan looked around as if searching for someone. Soon her eyes found Shahryar, who stood quietly in a corner, head bowed in sorrow. The princess ran to him, grabbed both his hands and said, "Brother Shahryar, if it weren't for you, my marriage to Prince Ama would never have happened. You came up with such a brilliant idea that father had no choice but to give up his condition." Shahryar smiled and said, "I had heard in many stories that when a princess finds herself in great trouble, the king always makes the same proclamation. Whoever frees the princess from her plight will marry her. I simply reminded the prince of this, knowing he was brave and capable enough to help you." The princess smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I will never forget what you've done for me, Shahryar. You are more than just a brother to me. You are my closest friend." With that, Princess Gulfashan said her final goodbyes and departed with Prince Ama to her new kingdom. In time, Princess Gulfashan and Prince Ama ruled their land with great wisdom and kindness, and they remained deeply in love. The people of their kingdom flourished under their reign, and the story of how Princess Gul Fashion was saved by a magical feather and a clever plan became a legend told for generations.